Since the news broke that the BBC could be looking at ways to extend the licence fee, viewers at GB News have shared with us some of their stories of how they felt harassed by TV licensing. So I thought, who better to have back to join us than Mark Whitfield from TV Licence Resistance. Thanks for joining us, Mark.
No problem.
So I thought I'd read out some of these comments. So we've got one viewer who said, I got rid of my TV on the 2nd of Jan 2017. I've had 40 plus TV licensing enforcement letters since September 2020. They feel that counts as harassment. So over the 5 full years that they've not had a TV license, they've received on average 8 letters a year. One person who was a student pointed out that living with 3 other students in a flat, they've had to get 4 TV licenses, and those who haven't wanted to have been inundated with letters from TV licensing. Someone else said, I keep getting letters telling me to report that I don't need a license, but the website's been down for months. Someone else countered, saying they cancelled in 2019, they've not had any problems. Someone else said, my dad was over 70 and struggling with dementia. He was getting threatening sounding letters. I was disgusted and decided then and there we'd never watch the BBC again. Another person said they cancelled. They only watched it for the Olympics, had their TV licence for that, cancelled it afterwards, but they've received letters ever since, and even had someone coming round to their house on a Sunday. Now, obviously, you've been working with people who have been affected by the types of letters that our viewers are describing here. Are you surprised by some of these accounts?
Really? No. I mean, that's very much the standard pattern of letters that most people will receive 1 letter per month indefinitely. The only exception that TV licensing say they give is that if people follow the no license needed process, then the letters can stop. I think they've just shortened the period of that. It used to be they would stop for 2 years, and now it's only 1 year. So I think probably what's going to happen is more people will decide that it's not worth doing for that shorter period of time, and the number of no license needed will go down, and there'll be more people that are out there just receiving the letters and binning them every month. I mean, the thing about the letters is there's a lot in there that is not true, fictionalized, exaggerated, generally kind of aggressive, threatening. And people really, the single piece of advice that I would give people is don't take them seriously. They're really not a serious piece of business communication. They're something else, which is to do with the BBC being the kind of institution that it is, not having oversight over this aspect of its business. So it's kind of developed this flavour of kind of combining threats, misinformation, and marketing devices, and none of that's appropriate to send to the British public. I think most people in receipt of the letters will be pretty disgusted by them, and then to receive them on an ongoing basis every month, it's just inappropriate.
Yeah, I mean, clearly at the very least there's an admin issue because, as one of our viewers said, they notified the BBC, they notified TV licensing that they wouldn't be continuing, but they've still received these letters. And I think someone else there mentioned about their parent having dementia. Now, there's going to be many people that think that they've sorted this for their parent or their loved one who they might have power of attorney over or whatever. But unbeknownst to them, these letters are still coming through the doors. So TV licensing definitely have some questions to answer there. Now, you've kindly given me some examples of the kind of letters that we're talking about. So it'd be great if we can kind of go through them and what they mean. I'm looking at example 1, which we'll get on the screen for viewers. Now, it looks very official, doesn't it? I mean, it says your status unlicensed. There's a code here. An IN 0100 code has been issued against your address. We use it to target unlicensed homes like yours that require a visit from our enforcement officers. It sounds like you're in trouble.
It does, but it's the more you think about it, the more bizarre it is. Like, what does this code mean? Why are they using it in a letter to you? and not telling you exactly what it means. It doesn't make sense. Surely it will be even more powerful as a piece of communications if they actually explained quite carefully what it meant. And I think we can deduce from that either it doesn't mean anything at all, that is, that it's one of these made-up marketing devices, or it's so obscure, such an obscure data item in their database that it wouldn't make any sense to members of the public anyway. It could be quite a subtle kind of distinction between different types of addresses or something like that. But really, in terms of placing it sort of front and centre on a letter to the general public, that's really quite strange. There's some quite bizarre thinking going on there, I think, behind that. And you see in other letters things like fake rubber stamps and fake signatures. It's all of the, when you see the competition promotion letters that people sometimes receive, it's taken from there. It's that kind of, we're going to make this more interesting by using fake devices, but there's kind of some kind of entertainment value in a promotion to have these fake marketing devices, but not in an official letter that's about law enforcement. It just seems wholly inappropriate.
I mean, I think it's difficult to look at a letter like this and not take away that it's at least an attempt at intimidation. Yeah. This is a formal notification. Your details have now been passed to the enforcement team. You could be visited at any time, day or evening, weekdays or weekends.
Yeah.
We need to check you're not breaking the law. You wouldn't tolerate a letter like that from the police.
Absolutely. I mean, if we just sort of break it down a little bit in terms of what it might mean in the minds of the BBC in terms of plausible deniability. So the code, maybe it's an obscure code on their database. It's been issued against your address. It's gone in the database. We use it to target unlicensed homes. That's an interesting form of words. Personally, I think if they want plausible deniability, then they probably wouldn't use the word target. I think that sounds a bit, sounds kind of specific and definitive, and also require a visit from our enforcement officers. Again, it sounds a bit too specific and a bit too direct. In other places in the letters, they use slightly vaguer language, like a visit has been scheduled. And we'll probably talk about that a little bit later on. Going on to the next part of the letter, your details have been passed to the enforcement team. Well, that's kind of what TV licensing is to the enforcement teams, such as they are. I don't think they're actual. I think they're virtual teams. That they're a group of individual doorsteppers, and they possibly work under a regional manager or something like that. It's not an actual team that's going to descend on your doorstep. It's probably one person in England and Wales, probably two people in Scotland. You could be visited. Well, yeah, you could be visited and you could just tell them to go away. So there's a lack of impartiality there, lack of balance that says, well, we're going to tell you that you can be visited, but we're not going to tell you anything about your rights when that happens.
I was going to say, there's nothing here about your right to refuse, to not let them in.
Absolutely not. No. And I think, a broader view would say when a law enforcement organisation writes to the public at this sort of scale, we talked about 41 million letters per year, when it's that kind of scale and scope, they really need to think quite carefully about balancing information in the communications between what they want to happen and what your rights and obligations are. And they persistently confuse those two things. And they also confuse what's part of the law. So the requirements for a TV licence, for example, if that's in the letter, that will be a summary of the law. But other things like the visits and receiving more letters, what happened the last time you received a letter, all of that is non-statutory. So the BBC's got no defence there to say, well, we had to do this because this is the law. No, it's not. It's not the law. It's not required. And I think they need to be more careful about conflating legal requirements and non-statutory compliance with their processes, which basically people don't need to do. It's entirely optional. And I think somewhere in there,
if you don't have a razor sharp focus on, the rules that they're allowed to enforce, you read this and it's like getting a letter from the bailiffs. They call them enforcement officers. If they find evidence of illegal TV viewing. What's interesting here is it says you could be interviewed under caution in accordance with national criminal law, which could lead to prosecution. So do these enforcement officers have the right to interview you under caution if they find this evidence?
Well, there's a couple of things there. So finding evidence, what they mean is that the householder tells them, the householder admits to watching without a licence. So they're not actually looking to find physical evidence of evasion. They're after some kind of statement of admission that they can then turn into a written confession. Anyone under UK law can interview anyone else under caution. So the TV licensed people, they're not. I mean, they call them enforcement officers. What they actually are is kind of salesmen with pretensions. So they're given the objective to go out and sell TV licenses. And in that, if they find evidence of evasion, they can document that and submit it for prosecution at the same time. Again, it's this thing of how can they write things that are somewhat innocuous in such a way as to make them sound very threatening and very legalistic as well. Again, I would be happier to see that when they say we can interview you under caution, they would say, because that's a legal claim, that they would actually identify your key rights of right to silence, right to counsel. And that would at least steer people in the right direction in terms of understanding that this is a balanced process. This is a process under which people have rights. And the difficulty is that TV licensing are using these letters as a way of softening up the public to believe that when they get the knock at the door, that means something significant in a legal sense, that they've lost some control over the situation. Whereas in actual fact, they have all the control over the situation. They cannot answer the door. They can answer the door and say, not today, thank you. They can allow the TV licensed person to start asking questions and then they can say no comment. They can allow the TV licensed person to start asking questions and then they can say, well, actually, I'd like to speak to the solicitor before I answer any of your questions. Now, how do we arrange that? And that raises a practical question of how do you arrange for someone to have a solicitor for an interview under caution that's taking place on their doorstep? So there's quite an important legal, technical issue there that the TV licensing never address. It's just kind of left hanging there that, we're pretty sure nobody's ever going to ask for a solicitor. Why would they do that? Well, that's their right. And they should do that. So there's a lot of kind of...
Well, that thing that you mentioned there about, the reader feeling as though, or the thought being pervaded to them that they're losing control. That theme continues, I think, even louder in the second example that you sent to me. It starts with, we did not hear from you, in bold, I'm assuming red letters, I've got a black and white copy here, with a stamp, enforcement approved, looks like someone official has signed that. And it says, we wrote to tell you we were giving you 10 days to get correctly licensed, free from the risk of an enforcement visit. So they've set, by what you tell me of the powers that they actually have, they've set an arbitrary deadline.
Yes.
To make the person now feel like they've run out of time.
Yes, that's absolutely their intention. There is no deadline in the law. If you're breaking the law now, that's all there is. There's no kind of, I'll give you another 10 days to sort it out. I think one of the things that they like to be able to do is they like to be able to play the game with magistrates and say, oh, we've been very fair with this person. We gave them this and we gave them that. We gave them every chance to buy a licence, and they didn't do that. And I think this is one of those kind of bits of psychology that says, we're being very fair. We're giving you time. We're giving you a second chance, if you like, in order to get yourself sorted out. The problem is, a lot of people in receipt of this letter already are correctly licensed because they don't need a TV license. So that state of not needing one and not having one is being correctly licensed. So I think the kind of we did not hear from you in big red letters at the top. That's a really tricky one. The fact is, there's no obligation for people to communicate with TV licensing. If they don't need a license and they're not breaking the law, then there's no need for them to speak to TV licensing. It's just as if you weren't breaking the criminal law, you wouldn't need to go and speak to the police and say, "Oh, I'm not breaking any laws," just so you know. So yeah, it's a strange kind of thing that they have no right to demand that you speak to them. And yet they're implying that they do. And again, unacceptable.
You open up the letter, you see the big stamp of the visit improved. We did not hear from you. Act now to stop this visit and conveniently pay.
Yes. So in a lot of the letters vary. Some of them have 3 options. So pay, move a license from somewhere else, or tell us you don't need one. But there are some letters like this where there isn't really an option there to tell them that you don't need one. It's not in there. It basically says pay or risk a prosecution. So again, they need to be consistent and they need to have the complete set of options. And that would include doing nothing as well, because that's a valid option under the law. So they would ideally have 4 options on every letter, that you can pay, you can tell them you don't need a license, you can move a license from another address, or you can do nothing.
Well, you raise a really important point there, because most people say, okay, right, I'll notify them that I don't need a license. But there's also the point of that actually I don't have to tell them anything about me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the reasons why I'm kind of confident to come onto GB News and talk about this is because the TV licensing don't know where I live. So I moved house, and I think the previous occupants probably had a TV license, but it doesn't really matter. When it became unlicensed, they started writing to me, but at that stage I was already the legal occupier in terms of the way they were addressing letters, which indicated that they didn't have any idea who I was. So even if they thought, oh, that guy is going on to the television and saying really bad things about us, we should sort him out. Well, good luck with that. You've got to find out where I live first of all. So there's a whole thing about the manipulation of information in order to threaten people. And one of the reasons why people can make their own mind up about the no license needed process. One of the reasons why I don't do it is because I don't want to give them any information that I don't have to give them, because they'll only use it against me at some point in the future, even if it's just when they come to the door and saying, "Can I speak to Mr. Whitfield?" Well, that puts you on the back foot. Whereas if they were to come to the door and say, "Oh, we need to speak to someone who lives here," we don't even know what their name is. Well, yeah, okay. Who are you? Who are you again? Okay, not to take things. And it really does leave them quite powerless if they don't have information about you.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have the full example of that letter, so there could very well be a section over leaf where they say of your options. But on the other examples we've seen, there's never been an option I've seen that says you have the ability to do nothing.
Yeah.
On the third and final example that we've got, it almost seems like they move it to the next stage. This has become an enforcement notice.
Yes.
And in big bold letters, it's to avoid a visit and a potential fine of up to £1,000. buy a TV license now. Now, if you only read, you see this as soon as you open up the letter, it seems the subliminal message that you receive is that you should have a license or you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, I mean this is a new letter. They started sending these out in the last quarter of last year. The interesting thing about it is, again, I mean, part of it is that some of these things are just an insult to the intelligence. That they've decided to put this handwriting font into the letter. I'm not even sure what that's supposed to mean. Are they seriously trying to imply that somebody in TV licensing headquarters is sitting at a desk with a stack of 500,000 letters, and on each one they're writing in by hand a notional visit date, and writing no TV license. Well, yeah, we know there's no TV license. Everybody knows that's why you're writing. It's quite strange. I mean, I think you're right that there's a psychological immediate impact that says, oh, they've got my information here, and they've gone to the trouble of filling this out by hand. Or it must be that much more important. The other issue with it is that they've titled it enforcement notice. Now, I understand from legal people that enforcement notice is a specific term under the law that is not about writing vague notices to people. It's actually intended to be linked to a specific legal action, and the kind of the result of that is that something is legally compelled to be done. But that isn't what this is. This is just another fishing expedition, another piece of psychological coercion. And all they've done is they've changed the format, changed a few words. But as I say, using the term enforcement notice is probably unlawful, because it means something specific that this doesn't fulfill those criteria.
Well, and I read this and it almost seems to me like I have no way out if I'm someone who doesn't want a license, because it says even if you notify them, if you claim you don't need a license and are found by our officers to be watching TV illegally, you could still be prosecuted and may have to pay the fine. Yeah. So that means that they could still visit then.
Oh, when you fill in the no license needed form, there's actually a clause in the conditions for that says you agree to them visiting. Now, it's not legally binding, but again, this kind of psychology of encouraging people to lose control over the situation. So you could sign that, and then they could turn up and you could still send them away legally. But I think if you've put yourself in the position where you've agreed to that, I think that I've actually seen a video where a TV licensed person comes to someone's door and there's some sort of challenge to them at the door. And the TV licensed person basically says, well, you filled in the no license needed, didn't you? And the householder says, yes. And they say, well, when you did that, you said that you agreed that somebody might call. And I'm that person. So yeah, they can be funny and outrageous at the same time. But as I say, it doesn't make any legal difference to the fact that they're at your home and you can tell them to go away if you want to. So there's a whole battle there. And one of the things that is disappointing about it is that the BBC would say that they're a nice organisation, that they care for people in minority groups and people with disabilities. And yet these letters, if somebody has poor English skills or they have cognitive issues, these letters are going to be really hard for them to deal with. They may well need support. Or
simply someone who's trusting and naive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and again, you kind of have to challenge the BBC's logic on this. If they're sending 40 million of these letters, they've got no excuse for saying, oh, well, it's this very specific group that we're sending them to, and they'll know really what they mean. Well, no, because you're sending that many letters that you're covering a complete cross section of society. And there probably is the situation with people from ethnic minority groups, where they may well be watching their TV from their home country, and they're not watching BBC or any live TV in the UK, so therefore they don't need a licence, and yet they're going to have to deal with these letters with their obscure meaning and vague legal threats. It really is quite unacceptable.
This matters so much, especially because since we last spoke, it's now come out in the media that the BBC is looking at potentially a return to the radio license.
Yeah.
I mean, people have radios in their cars. Would that not be even more invasive in terms of enforcement?
One of the things that's happening at the moment is that because the charter is going to be reviewed in 2027, there's a lot of noise in the media from different commentators, from the BBC themselves, and quite a big part of that is the implication that don't mess us around too much because you might not like what we come up with. Radio is an interesting one. I think it's going to be quite difficult for them to apply that. The radio license was withdrawn in 1971. In the era of people sitting in the park with an old school transistor radio, it just became unenforceable, and it's even more unenforceable now when people have got a phone in their pocket that can receive live radio, the radio in their car, as you say. It's interesting because Germany, when they revised their TV license, they added radio to it at that stage, and it became, for a while, an enormous public headache, especially for fleet operators, for hire car companies, to license all the radios in all of their hundreds of cars. It became a huge bureaucratic overhead. I'm not sure what they've done with it now. I think they might have withdrawn it. But I think it's past the point when radio can be licensed. And also, the only reason why they want to do that is because some of the radio services that the BBC offers, for example, Radio 3 and Radio 4, they're the most expensive radio in the world, especially Radio 4. It's very, very resource intensive compared to commercial radio. So there's a question there as to, well, if you're a little bit more realistic with the output from Radio 4, perhaps you wouldn't need to have a radio license to cover the costs of it. But I mean, it's interesting because it does uncover one difficult fact about the TV license, which is at the moment the TV license payers are paying for BBC Radio, and they're not given any choice about that. There's no tick box on the TV license that says I'm happy to pay for radio or I'm not happy to pay for radio. So it is something that was already an anachronism that probably needed sorting out at some point. But I'm not sure that licensing radio is the way to go. I think it's going to be far too hard to do.
If we try and see it from the BBC's point of view, I mean, a lot of other countries in Europe have public service broadcasters. You mentioned the example of how Germany used to at least collect their license fee. Some countries, they just slap it onto your council tax or they take it out of your PAYE. In the BBC's defence, at least there is some element of choice of opting out of it. And the problem is the ways in which the BBC broadcasts, as you say, over radio, online, on TV, it's just a very difficult situation for them to enforce, and they're just doing their best.
I think that's... I think I'd agree with you that it's difficult to enforce. I'm not sure they're doing their best. I think you're right in that there is this kind of thing. I was thinking back... I remember I couldn't find it when I was looking for it today, but I remember seeing a license enforcement letter. I think it was from the late 60s. So it was sent by the post office, the GPO as it was. And it was interesting because it was more polite, obviously, but also it was kind of more bureaucratic but less threatening. And I think what's happened to the BBC is that they've, as times have changed, and they've kind of lost that ability to send communications that are bureaucratic and officious. They've had to find some other angle. And I think the angle that they've chosen is to be deceptive and threatening. And I'm not sure that that's acceptable. I mean, I think what they're relying upon is people not taking them too seriously. But as I said before, I think that will vary by individual, and that some people may find them very, very threatening.
It's effectively, it's just an honour system, really, isn't it? As you say, they don't really have a lot of power unless you confess.
Yes.
And I'm not advocating anyone watch BBC while not paying their TV licensing. You should pay for what you watch. But they're in a difficult position where they're almost forced into these kinds of manipulations and intimidations because they actually have nothing to back it up with. They're just hoping that people, as I say, it's an honour system.
Well, I think we've had commercial pay TV in the UK for a long while now. And I think basically we're at the stage where we're probably saying actually the TV licensing enforcement as it presently stands isn't fit for purpose, that the BBC have backed themselves into a corner where they have to be so threatening over their limited amount of powers that it becomes a public nuisance, possibly amounting to legal harassment. So actually the answer to that is not to try and find a different way of wording the letters to make them mildly less threatening, mildly more informative, but actually to radically reform the system itself, the actual technology, and say that sort of broadcasting free to air and then having a TV license on the sidelines to that, it's not working. There are 6 million. The BBC talks about £1.1 billion of potential loss of funding. That amounts to 6.3 million TV licenses. So what we're saying is that about a quarter of households are not paying. They're either not paying legally or they're not paying illegally. And that's a big chunk of the population to kind of, as you say, kind of run this honour system with. I don't think you can do that. I think that becomes a logistical nightmare. And the BBC, they have 227 field workers at the moment. They're trying to cover off 6 million homes with 227 people. That's just ridiculous. There's no way they can do any more than scratch the surface of that, and that's even without the fact that people can just ignore them. So I think the answer to it is to reform it, and our preference is for a subscription system. Effectively, what we've got at the moment is a subscription system anyway. We've just got it where the payment is a license rather than a subscription. That's a distinction in name only, really, because as long as the license is optional, it has that same kind of sense of opting in or opting out that a subscription would have. So we would want to see that as a solution.
It doesn't seem as though the Labour government are ready to fully abandon the licence fee yet, though. And so in the meantime, we've poured through these letters and the examples in which we feel that it's quite unacceptable, the communications that regular Brits are receiving when they've done nothing wrong. Yeah. What would you guys like to see in maybe an improved letter that the BBC sends out?
I think it's very hard. I mean, first of all, the frequency of letters is irrational. It doesn't make sense for them to send a letter to households every month, or in some cases more often than that. So we'd want to see an agreement that said, well, maybe when somebody becomes unlicensed, maybe they get a first letter, one at the beginning of it, and then another letter the next month. And then after that, we go to 6 monthly letters. And most people don't move house with that kind of level of frequency. If they wanted to use some kind of data analysis to say, well, actually, in this area, people typically do move more frequently and will send more frequent letters. But in those other areas, people don't move very frequently and will limit the number of letters we send over a period of time. I actually think it would probably be more impactful for people to go for 5 or 6 months, not hearing from the BBC TV licensing, and then suddenly out of the blue, they get a reminder letter. If you're watching TV, you need a license. Here's how to get one, that kind of thing. I think what they need to do is possibly working with plain English groups and with the Advertising Standards Authority. I think they need to get some kind of rational view in there as opposed to just taking their own echo chamber about what's appropriate. So to get some kind of sense of how to word letters that are going to be sent to a complete cross-section of society such that people can reasonably understand what their rights and obligations are and not be threatened, not be harassed, not be coerced, and not be misinformed. And I think that could help a lot. Yeah.
And just finally, I know we've kind of touched on the rights that people have, but I think it'd be nice to have something coherent for people to take away. A lot of the people viewing this will be people that don't have TV license fees, are receiving these letters. If they receive a letter, what should they do? If an enforcement officer comes to their door, what should they do?
The letters can just be disposed of. So you can put them, obviously remove personal information, put them in the recycling. Alternatively, they can be returned. So there's no cost to return a letter that has a return address on the back. Just write, please return to sender on the front and send it, put it back in the postbox. I understand that there are millions of TV license letters being returned either by individuals or by the Royal Mail themselves, where they try to deliver to an address that doesn't exist or is derelict. They will return that letter to TV licensing. So that already exists as a path. Now, I think for some people it can be quite empowering just to say, this is like rubbish. I'm not even going to bother opening it. I'm going to send it back and they can deal with it and they can deal with the cost of disposing of it. I've not heard any feedback from the BBC or from the industry about the costs of disposing of all of those letters. There's an issue there in that some of them might possibly have personal information in them. So they would have to destroy them in a way that's consistent with data protection. So that would probably add cost to the process. I think that works. I've done that in the past, and it's quite satisfying to take a stack of half a dozen letters and put them back in the postbox. So those are the options for that. There are legal options, and a YouTuber, Black Belt Barrister, is currently it's quite interesting. He's kind of developed his position on TV licensing over a long period of time. He's gradually looked into the issue. He's looked at the law as it applies, and produced a number of quite interesting videos about it. His current view is that it's possible to issue a legal term called cease and desist to TV licensings, which will then prevent them from sending further letters to you. The idea of that making it a legal thing is that obviously if they do send letters after that, then it makes for a stronger case for harassment because you've already told them that you don't want their letters, you don't find them useful. So if TV licensing come to your door, obviously you don't have to answer the door to them. If they're just there by themselves, if they're on their routine sales visits, you don't even have to answer the door. And the chances are, if you've got a video doorbell, they may not even ring the door, the doorbell or knock anyway, because they won't want to be caught on video during the process of speaking to you. There are quite a few videos online showing interaction with TV licensing at the door. However, what we don't see are videos where TV licensing successfully interview people. There aren't many of those, and given that they're making millions of visits per year, that's quite interesting, and it kind of indicates that they're avoiding being videoed during the process of interviewing a caution, which suggests that there may be something to hide there, that they don't want to have any kind of minor pace non-compliance being videoed and possibly shown to a court later to invalidate the confession. So videoing is good, whether you video with the phone or with a video doorbell. So once you start speaking to them, obviously you need to know who they are, and they're often a little bit reluctant to identify themselves initially. Typically they'll ask for a person by name, whether that will be the last person that they had a name on their database. So that could be a previous occupier, it could be you, it could be a spurious database entry. We've had that before. So at that point, what they'll do is typically either ask that person by name, or they'll ask you if you've just moved there. And those are kind of openers to having a discussion with them at the door. So at that stage, obviously, as soon as they ask a question, are you Mr. Smith? You say, well, who's asking? Who are you? Why are you here at my door asking for a person that I don't know who that is? And then once they identify themselves as TV licensing, you say, thanks, not today, and shut the door. And there's nothing that they can really do about that, because unless you're in a very unfortunate position where your front door opens onto your living room and they're showing EastEnders in the background, then they're not going to have, they haven't got the evidence that you've admitted anything, and they haven't got the evidence of their own eyes that they've seen something. So they're really kind of powerless at that point. They just have to walk away down the path. Even after they sense that they might have some kind of admission from you in casual conversation, they'll want to document that on what they call their form TVL178, which is a multi-part paper form that basically captures confession to watching TV or iPlayer. And that's a legal form. It's effectively a witness statement from you that admits to certain things. The wording is defined by them. It's set out as a series of multi-part questions. So they are asking who you are, asking for personal details. They're asking, what did you watch? When did you watch it? What platform did you watch it on? That kind of thing. The basics of setting out the evasion offence. Even at the stage where they start filling in that form, you can say, I decline to be interviewed. Under PACE in England and Wales, you can decline to be interviewed under caution pretty much anywhere, but certainly anywhere away from a police station. You can also ask for a solicitor, and as I said before, the actual practicality of arranging a solicitor for an interview at the doorstep is something that they haven't really thought about. And I suspect that all they could do at that stage is say, well, we'll leave it there for now, and you can talk to your solicitor, and when you've spoken to them, we can arrange to go to their office or something. But I think any good solicitor, the first thing they will say is, don't say anything. Just rely on your right to silence, and without that, they've not got anything. So yeah, right to silence, the right to decline an interview, and the right to solicitor. They're three quite powerful rights that people under interview under caution process have. And if only everybody knew about them, TV licensing would have a very, very hard job to actually get any more confessions out of people. So I definitely advocate that people bear those things in mind for any doorstep encounters they might have.
Well, Mark, thank you for a great conversation again, and I will thank you on behalf of our viewers in the comments for last time.
Thanks.